Hello, this is Jerry Mateo, and welcome back. In this chapter, I'm going to be going over the touch control inside of the Flux Evo channel, and this specific section really needed its own chapter because it's extremely powerful, and I feel like we need to really sit down and spend some time with it so you can have a strong understanding of what it does. Let's start off with the overall layout. It has a very simple layout, 3 knobs and a slider. You also have a listen button. This allows you to solo up the frequencies that you're going to be processing, but that's pretty much it as far as the layout. It's extremely simple and easy to use. Now there are some extra options, like you can click on the blue section and drag it around, and this allows you to select very specific frequencies you want to process, and then you can even do more fine-tuning by clicking on the actual sliders, and you can make this full range or have a very, very tight little range of frequencies that you want to process. This is great for dialing and processing on only specific frequencies, but even that is a very small part of how powerful the touch control is. Now, the 3 knobs, which are pretty simple to understand, are amount, range, and mode. Amount controls how much processing you're going to be doing. Mode is selecting one of the 7 modes that you have inside of the touch control, and that is the Transient Booster, the Transient Killer, Sustain Booster, Sustain Killer, your 2 de-essers, and then your expander gate. You'll notice that this release control actually changes depending on the mode that you're in. If you're in one of the 2 de-essers, it changes to a range mode, which controls how much maximum gain reduction you're going to allow. All the other modes use it as a release knob. This controls how fast the touch control is going to stop processing the audio. So it's great for dialing in if you want to have a very abrupt sound or a very smooth, sustained sound. With that said, that's pretty much all there is to knowing what the controls do, but I want to go over some examples really quickly. Let's start off with a transient boost. This is, like it sounds, a transient booster. So it's going to increase the transient of whatever signal is being processed. And let's take a listen to this piano, for example. It sounds fine, right? But let's say we want to do some creative work and we want to enhance maybe the initial sound of the hammer hitting the strings. We can hit listen and drag this around where we think it's going to be, and then use these sliders to fine-tune where that frequency is. Sounds like right about there. We take it off listen, and now we simply just increase the amount. Bypass it, and back on. You initially hear an increase in the transient because it's boosting it, but it sounds a little bit too abrupt, like it just starts and then stops. That's because the release is set very short. We can simply increase this or even decrease it and change the sound. Let's try making this longer. And now let's make this extremely long. It's pretty impressive how much control you have over just the transient boost section alone, but you have the same amount of control over every other section inside of it. Next, let's take a look at the transient kill. This does the opposite of the transient booster. It's going to kill the transient. So if we select these lower frequencies and listen to them, that sounds like basically all of the body and the hammer of the piano. So let's just increase the amount to max and let's see what it sounds like now. It basically makes it sound like there's more tack than hammer hit, and it really focuses on getting rid of that low end transient that comes in. Let's see what happens if we use the release knob to dial that in more. It sounds really interesting because it sounds like it's doing some ducking or like it's swelling into the sound before it hits, which is really cool and allows you to do some creative sound design work. Another really cool and powerful thing about this, though, is the ability to use this to correct some problems. So I'm going to take this keyboard out of solo. Let's go to this vocal draft part, and let's find a nice big plosive. Right around here should be a big plosive because the singer did not really sing into a pop filter. He kind of felt it wasn't needed. So what we're going to do is bypass the touch control and the EQ control so you can really listen to it. Right off the bat, you can hear that it's a very obvious plosive. It kind of hits you in the face and makes it sound a little bit less professional. Let's see if we can use the touch control to fix this. We simply turn it on, put it into Transient Kill mode, hit listen, and dial in the frequencies. That sounds like that should be about right. Let's increase the amount and see what happens. That's helped quite a bit. Let's see if we can increase the release time to make it sound a little bit smoother. That sounds really good. Let's try cranking it up all the way. That actually does a pretty good job. Now what we can do with this is we can actually go into the signal flow, make sure that the touch control is first, and then utilize the other processors to kind of help remove any of the unwanted artifacts that happen with using so much transient killing. So in this case, I can turn on the equalizer and you can see that I have boosted up a little bit of the low end and used a very, very subtle cut using the high pass filter to kind of make it sound a little bit fuller, but also maintain the touch control's ability to get rid of the transient or the plosive. Now that sounds very, very aggressive, obviously. So what we're going to do is back off on the release. And then we can bring down the amount and utilize the equalizer and compressors to help fine tune this effect. If we bypass it and turn it back on, it fixed it a lot. But if we want to make this as invisible as possible, we can easily just have a little bit of transient kill and then utilize the EQ to help dial it in even more. But it's a very powerful tool, and as you see, it's extremely easy to do. I actually do this quite a bit when I'm doing a lot of voiceover work. With that said, let's move on to the next section, which is the sustain booster. So for that, we're going to go to this snare drum, and I'm going to solo this up. Let's find a place where it's playing. Should be right around here. You can hear that this is a snare sample, and a really cool thing about the sustain boost section is you can select what frequency you want to control, like all the other modes. So what I want to do is just do a broadband sustain boost. Let's see what this sounds like. Bypass it. Turn it back on. It helps boost the sustain and make it sound like it's lasting longer. Let's dial it in with the release knob. That has really extended the sustain of that snare. Let's bypass it. Turn it back on. Now, another really cool thing is we, of course, can use these sliders to dial in the exact frequencies we want to process, but for this actually sounds pretty good. Let's try the sustain killer mode next. This does the opposite of the sustain boost, and we have it still set to 100%. Let's see what this sounds like. It does the exact opposite. Let me bypass it and turn it back on. It's really tightened up the sustain, and this is a great way of maybe getting rid of some unwanted frequency buildup that might be lasting a little bit too long on a acoustic guitar or a kick drum recording. Let's see what happens if I process just part of the frequency spectrum using the sustain kill mode. We'll switch this to listen and dial it in. Let's do just the high end and bypass it first. And now we'll turn it on. You'll notice that the low end and the mid range is still just as long, but the high end now immediately drops down. This is a really cool and powerful trick to use when you want to do some sound design. Let's move on to the next mode, which is the De-Esser. And for this, we have a vocal track that I'm going to be using. Let's take a listen to it.
I always get the highest whenever you're with me. Sit there for hours and watch the cars go by. It won't stop you and I.
Right off the bat, you can hear that it's extremely sibilant, especially right here.
Sit there for hours and watch the cars go by.
So what we want to do is kill the sibilants. We'll put the touch control into listen mode, and we'll find the frequencies that we want to get rid of.
Sit there for hours and watch the cars go by.
And just to make sure we have the right frequencies, let's listen under that.
Sit there for hours and watch the cars go by. You won't stop.
That's perfect. Okay, so now what we want to do is select one of the de-essers, crank up the amount just to hear what it sounds like so we can find out which one works best for this situation. We'll start with de-esser mode 1.
Sit there for hours and watch the cars go by.
Let's try de-esser 2.
Sit there for hours and watch the cars go by.
Notice that de-esser 2 is a lot more fast acting, so you can actually hear it cutting in and out because it's only processing these frequencies that are going above the overall amount or threshold that you're setting up. So for this, I think de-esser 1 might be the one for us. We'll change the range to be only about 7 decibels of gain reduction. Keep the amount rather high, and this way we're able to do de-essing very consistently, but we're also going to be doing only a little bit of gain reduction. Let's take a listen to it now.
Sit there for hours and watch the cars go by.
Versus before.
Sit there for hours and watch the cars go by. Sit there for hours.
Much less aggressive, and that's a really powerful tool because the fact that you have a channel strip that also has a de-esser and a transient designer inside of it is really cool because you can do a lot of corrective work. And of course, you can make it first in the signal chain to either be before or after EQ and compression. And with that said, the last thing we have is the expander gate. Pretty simple tool. It's meant to gate out a signal source. So if we go right here, bypass it.
Go with me. Sit.
Let's say we don't want to have that much of that breath. We simply turn this on, dial in the amount, and use the release control to dial in how fast we want it to release.
Sit there for hours. Sit there.
As you can hear, it did a pretty good job. Versus with it off.
Sit there for hours. Sit there for hours.
Now, of course, you are going to have to be careful because if you have the amount set too high and the release control set wrong, it's going to be a little grabby. So let's see if we bring down the amount and we increase the release time. Let's hear what happens.
Sit there for hours and watch the cars go by.
With it bypassed.
Sit there for hours.
And with it on.
Sit there.
Much smoother. And because we have the amount and release set properly, it doesn't get in the way. So with that said, that's everything you need to know on how to operate the touch control. With that said, that's going to be it for this chapter. I hope you enjoyed. And stay tuned because in the next chapter, I'm going to be showing you how I go about using the Evo channel to mix a multi-track drum recording.